As many of you will have heard, the new Super Mario Bros. Movie starring well-prepared and lesser-known actors who were chosen for their talent rather than star power is being produced by Illumination, the creator-based film studio behind such game-changing instant classics as Minions: The Rise of Gru and the third of 3 Grinch movies. But did you know that the Super Mario Bros. Movie is actually a standalone sequel to the 1993 sleeper hit Super Mario Bros.? Widely regarded as one of the best films to ever be included on Wikipedia's list of the worst films ever made, Super Mario Bros. Was such a hit at the box office that it spawned a number of video game adaptations that may not have been canon to the movie, but expanded the fictional universe into new and... Okay, that's getting old. All jokes aside, you probably know that Super Mario Bros. Was a real movie based on the Nintendo IP of the same name that was released in 1993 and became instantly reviled by critics and fans of the franchise alike. Despite Nintendo's assertion that the franchise could withstand some experimentation, and their later refusal of creative control, easily the biggest complaint about Super Mario Bros. Was its departure from the source material, where the bulk of Mario-based games even to this day involve childlike characters in cartoon fantasy environments, solving puzzles and running the gambit of traditional storylines. The film was an adult-oriented live-action comedy very openly inspired by Ghostbusters, more so than the actual source material. While critics disparaged the movie's acting, effects, pacing, and pretty much everything one can disparage about a movie, fans were confused by the dino-centric plot, the human Bowser, the reptilian Goombas, and the stand-in for Princess Peach, who was less of a princess and more of a city-wide fungal infection. Things weren't exactly peachy behind the scenes either, with the 2 leads getting drunk in the mornings and staying drunk for every shoot, and Mario actor Bob Hoskins later recounting that the directors were, quote, a husband and wife team whose arrogance had been mistaken for talent, going on to call them f***ing idiots. Personally, I never understood the hate towards Super Mario Bros. If you can watch it without the unreasonable expectation that a semi-adult oriented American live-action comedy from the early 90s directed by a duo whose biggest claim to fame is an Elvis Costello music video will adhere directly to the story of an all-ages Japanese platformer series, the movie is actually pretty fun to watch. People talk about it like it's just plain bad, like, say, Super Babies, Baby Geniuses 2, when I think it more closely falls into the all-too overused designation of so bad it's good, like, say, The Room. Or Halloween Ends. But we're not here to retread opinions on 30-year-old movies that have been well and truly trodden. We're here to talk about a Mario adaptation that even the diehardest of diehard fans may not have heard of. The fan-made webcomic sequel to the 1993 film. When I say fan-made, I mean that's how the comic was labeled, presumably for legal purposes. In reality, it was written by Stephen Applebaum and Ryan Haas, from an original story by Parker Bennett, one of the movie's 3 credited writers, though Bennett himself claimed there were at least 10 writers in total, which is never a good sign. Titled Super Mario Bros. 2, the comic debuted in 2013 and followed from the sequel tease ending of the movie, which the writers admitted was meant as an homage to Back to the Future and not actually to set up any future stories. Much like the comic book sequel to Jim Henson's Labyrinth, Super Mario Bros. 2 depicted a more grounded version of the film's fantasy world and better developed human characters. In fact, the bulk of the comic is just talking, using more realistic dialogue to develop Mario, Luigi, Daisy, and the King in a way that's much harder to achieve in a movie's runtime, and definitely wasn't a major concern in that particular movie. Super Mario Bros. 2 begins with Daisy, now the ruling princess of the Mushroom Kingdom, the parallel universe, and specifically its capital city Dino-Hatton, accidentally opening a portal to a third dimension, not the third dimension, just another universe aside from Mario's and Daisy's, allowing her world to be besieged by an army of dinosaurs and Jawas. She quickly warps over to Brooklyn to ask the Marios for help, as per the movie's sequel hook, and they managed to fight off the army and close the gate. Although the comic was meant to pick up right where the movie ended, as per Back to the Future Part 2, I wouldn't be much of a nitpicky internet guy if I didn't point out that the dialogue doesn't exactly match up between the 2 scenes, and in the comic Mario was cooking, while in the movie Mario was watching TV. That being said, Daisy's state of disarray and her scrappy scavenger look are rendered nicely in the comic version. Even if her hair is down when it should be back. Okay, I'm done. Back in Dino Hatton, Mario and Luigi meet Daisy's father, retroactively named King Reznor, all snazzed up and fungus-free. Reznor throws a party for the Marios in thanks for closing the portal as well as their heroic efforts during the events of the movie, and a little later, our four heroes step out for some fresh air. Reznor confesses to Mario that he's struggling with returning to humanity, and that his relationship with the daughter he recently met for the first time is strained. Meanwhile, Daisy shows Luigi around the new and improved kingdom where they're focusing their efforts on botany and other sciences. These character-developing conversations are interrupted by a terrorist attack on the city, headed by our new antagonist, Wart. Wart is essentially an even Trumpier version of King Koopa, who was apparently manipulating the events of the movie from behind the scenes. Reznor and his head scientist, Professor Mouser, determined that Wart is operating out of Subcon, an old kingdom base that had previously been used as Koopa's secret HQ. Mario, Luigi, Daisy, and Mouser begin making plans to sneak into Subcon, figure out the extent of Wart's plan, and maybe even stop him then and there. The king gives a speech, encouraging his people in this time of crisis, and the Mario brothers prepare for their siege. Cut to black. The fourth issue of Super Mario Bros. 2 debuted in 2015, and since then, radio silence. Not much is known about the behind-the-scenes world of Super Mario Bros. 2, though we can infer it was always less chaotic and alcoholic than the movie set, but Applebaum has explained that, quote, "We have planned for 10 chapters of about 10 pages each, which will then lead into a final adventure to close off a trilogy for the characters. We also have several side stories to explore in what we'd like to think of as an expanded universe, which will be open to other writers and artists." Putting aside the obvious post-MCU linguistic choices, it's fair to say that Applebaum and Haas were always hoping to flesh out the universe they helped create. Whether or not Dino Hatton had any relevance to the games, and whether or not the movie was actually any good, the team behind the camera created a fictional world that's complicated enough and interesting enough to explore a little further. About the universe of Dino Hatton, Applebaum said, quote, "Super Mario Bros. Provided a look into a world too rich and too original to not explore again. We knew that if we brought the Mario Brothers back to Dino Hatton, there would be an audience for that story," going on to claim that the film certainly has been unfairly regarded, although in recent years, opinion has shifted. The change in tone between Super Mario Bros. And Super Mario Bros. 2 is apparent. While the movie was lighthearted, tongue-in-cheek, and more often than not painfully ridiculous, the comic manages to explore its characters in a more grounded, true-to-life way while maintaining the wackiness of the fictional world. Like the movie, reading the comic demands that you put aside any attachment to the Mario franchise and view it as its own separate entity, a direct sequel to a movie that was also, for our purposes, its own separate entity. And if the world of Super Mario Bros. Feels too ridiculous to ever host a character-driven story, let me remind you of a movie called The Wizard of Oz. Just like in the movie, Luigi is the emotional center of the comic, though now that he's firmly in Daisy's good graces, he is allowed to relax and show his more mature side, instead of just being the love-struck goofball. Mario is still the funny one, in that he seems less consequential to the plot, and his curmudgeonly attitude always makes for good Schadenfreude-style humor, but his conversation with Reznor is surprisingly poignant, especially when Reznor admits that he doesn't know how to talk to Daisy, and Mario angrily tells him that family doesn't have to be a science experiment. Despite what I said just a minute ago, fans of the Mario franchise don't have to feel left out of this comic. Not only does Super Mario Bros. 2 develop the world and characters of the film, it also borrows heavily from the source material, specifically the 1988 platformer of the same name. While the movie used familiar names and phrases for completely unrelated elements, the comic does the same, but with a more faithful approach, making it clear that while the writers may not be aiming to adapt the games, they at least respect the source material. For instance, the enemy army is primarily composed of Shy Guys, perennial Mario enemies who first appeared in Yume Kojo, Doki Doki Panic, the game that would later be re-released as Super Mario Bros. 2 in 1988. Wart's evil lair Subcon is also a tribute to Super Mario Bros. 2, being the main setting of the game thanks to its hasty adaptation from the non-Mario related Yume Kojo. Wart himself first appeared as the main antagonist of Super Mario Bros. 2 and was given a cameo in The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, the frog-like leader of a gang known as the 8-Bits, which included, among others, Birdo in his/her first appearance and a totally rad-looking rodent named, you did guess it, Mouser, but presumably before he completed his dissertation. The way Super Mario Bros. 2 handles its source material reminds me of, To bring back our Wizard of Oz parallel from earlier, Wicked. Not the musical, but the books, a novel series that extends well past the events of the 1939 film into new, original storylines, but still manages to adapt elements from the original Oz books by L. Frank Baum that didn't even appear in the film. Although Super Mario Bros. 2 was primarily inspired by Super Mario Bros. 2, they didn't forget the hallmarks of the series that appeared before and after the former Yume Kojo. Unlike the film, the comic includes a piranha plant and sees Toad, now reverted to his human state, wearing a mask that bears a striking resemblance to the original Toad species. And who knows, if the series had continued, maybe we would have been introduced to Princess Peach or finally seen Dino Yoshi don his iconic shoes. Unfortunately, despite Applebaum's grand scheme for a multimedia trilogy and potential extended franchise, it doesn't look like we'll be seeing any more stories in the Super Mario Bros. Film universe anytime soon. Since the comic is legally fan-made, it's available to read online for free, which may be some indication as to why they haven't continued it. Hopefully someday the money will be there and the legal rights will fall into place. It would be a shame to end such a promising series on a cliffhanger. It's not as if Nintendo is particularly attached to their first attempt at adapting the franchise to film, especially not with their new CGI blockbuster, so they might as well let Applebaum and Haas continue as they were. But then again, we all know how protective Nintendo can be about their intellectual property. Intellectual or otherwise.